Hello, this is Mr. Papard, and we're beginning our lecture over Chapter 11, Secular Music of the Renaissance. You might recall from the previous chapter how we discussed the definition of the word secular. Remember, secular means non-religious. Chapter 10 was over sacred or religious music of the Renaissance. Now we're focusing on secular music from the Renaissance period. One type of work that was uniquely introduced in the Renaissance period is called the madrigal. The madrigal was basically a popular song, and it was secular, of course, and it was introduced in Italy, and it found its way to England. Now let's look at some of the characteristics. First of all, you're going to notice it says it's polyphonic in texture. Again, let's review the three textures we've discussed in this course. Monophonic texture. Mono means one. And monophonic texture is there just one melody playing. Remember in the medieval period we talked about chant music, Gregorian chant. Hodie Christus natus est, hodie salvator apparuit. Gregorian chant. That's a type of monophonic music that uses that monophonic texture. Monophonic texture can still be used today, but it was eventually replaced somewhat by polyphonic texture. Polyphonic texture, remember, poly means two or more, so two or more melodies or tunes happening at the same time. They're independent, but they still work well together. Well, a madrigal has polyphonic texture. What about the mood? Well, it's very expressive. It tells a story. It talks about love. It talks about joy. It talks about spring happening. It was joyful and dance-like in style. What about the language of the madrigal? Remember that the religious music, for example, the Renaissance motet, it was written in Latin. It was for worship. Well, the madrigal was in the language of the people, which, remember, in our previous chapter we talked about the Protestant hymns by Martin Luther and other composers that were in the language of the people. Well, madrigals were also in the language of the people. This is known as the vernacular, which is the language spoken every day. So our vernacular today in South Texas is English or Spanish or possibly both for some of us. So the madrigal. Now let's compare and contrast the motet and the madrigal. You'll recognize the characteristics of the motet we talked about in the previous chapter. Remember that it's vocal. Well, so is the madrigal. It's a vocal form. It's through composed. Well, so is the madrigal. Remember, through composed means it goes all the way from beginning to end of the music, and there's no real repetition of the musical material. New music is presented throughout. The texture is the same for both. Polyphonic for the motet, polyphonic for the madrigal. Here's one difference. The language of the motet is Latin. The language of the madrigal is the vernacular, or the language of the common people. That could be English, Italian, German, French, so on. The text, the subject of the text of the motet was religious. The madrigal dealt with secular or non-religious topics, as we mentioned just a few moments ago. The Renaissance motet was conservative as far as the way it expressed itself. The madrigal was very dramatic. And that will be coming back to for us to revisit as we go further in our musical history journey. We're going to discover some great music that's very expressive and very dramatic. The purpose of the motet was worship. The purpose of the madrigal was entertainment. Performance practice, the way they performed the music, the motet was sophisticated. Practice, in other words, rehearsed. The madrigal was more informal. Excuse me just a second. Went the wrong way. All right. Now, in Italy is where the madrigal originated. It was performed in the royal court. And remember, we've talked about in previous chapter, when we talk about royal courts, we're not talking about Judge Judy or Caso Cerrado, we're talking about a royal court where kings and queens ruled. And the Italian Madrigal was also performed by professional and amateurs. Now, a professional musician, of course, is someone that's trained in music. An amateur is someone that has, maybe they're self-taught, or someone, a family member just taught them. They don't have formal training in music. But madrigals could be performed by either person. In fact, in this time period, if you were educated, you were expected to be able to read music. And in fact, when they had a party, they wouldn't pull out their phones and they wouldn't log into some kind of account to listen to music, Spotify or whatever music service you use. They would get out their music books that had madrigals in them, and they would sing. They would provide their own music. And in fact, there was a case where an individual attended a party and everyone found out he couldn't read music. This is historically true. It really happened. They found out he couldn't read music, and everyone was shocked. Oh, you can't read music? Oh, my goodness. How improper. Well, that's really how they felt in this time period. Now, what happened in England as far as madrigals are concerned? Well, when Italian madrigals went to England, they were a little bit less emotional. A stereotype of British English people is that they're a little less emotional, more reserved. So that kind of may be possibly reflected in this English madrigal. They were lighter in mood. Now we're going to actually listen to an English madrigal. And let me open the listening. And this is As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descending. Let me just get a little more light in here. Pardon the pause here. Now, I want to review a little bit of the information on this song. This song is by Thomas Weelkes. It was written around 1601, and it is an English madrigal. And this exemplifies the light-hearted mood of the English madrigal. You're going to hear different things in this madrigal. For example, you're going to hear some of the words talked about as Vesta was from Latmos Hill Descending. Of course, that's the title. And when they sing descending, there's going to be a scale going down. Da 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 da. Remember, that's called word painting. Well, guess what happens on the word ascending? It says, the words say, she spied a maiden queen, the same ascending. And that maiden queen is actually a reference to Queen Elizabeth, because Thomas Weelkes was writing this to honor Queen Elizabeth. And so when it says the maiden queen was ascending, guess what? It goes up the scale. And there's a homophonic section. Remember, that's our third kind of texture, where it sounds like chords are playing with a melody. And then there's another line that says that Diana's darlings came running down amain. Well, on running down, there's imitative polyphony used. There's going to be a place I want you to listen for where it talks about the voices going 2 by 2 and 3 by 3. Guess what? When it says 2 by 2, 2 voices sing. When it says 3 by 3, 3 voices sing. And then when it says together, they all sing together. And then it's talking about later leaving their goddess all alone. You'll hear one voice. And of course, the goddess is a representation of Queen Elizabeth. Let's listen to As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descending. running, how it gets real busy musically. More word painting.
Then three by three together, leave their garments all alone, and mingling with the shepherds of the
That was As Vesta was from Latmos Hill Descending, an example of an English madrigal. All right, let's continue. Well, instrumental music in this time period. Instrumental music was popular in nature, and it was used in different dance forms and rhythms. There were pairs or sets or dance suites, and there were some pieces that were written to be played or sung. So it might be one time a group of people would decide to sing it, and then someone else, another group of people, would take the same song, and they had instruments, and they would play it using their instruments. And music was used, again, for entertainment. But this piece is called Queen Elizabeth's Galliard. Now, a galliard was a type of dance, and history says that Queen Elizabeth I, she loved to dance the galliard, and she would dance several every morning, several different galliard dances when she got up. That's something she enjoyed doing. And John Dowland again wrote this piece. It was similar to the other piece. It was written in honor of Queen Elizabeth. And you're going to hear this performed on the lute. And it's really, really interesting to listen to. Let's listen to this piece. See how much the lute sounds like a guitar? See the lute too she's holding? is such a beautiful instrument, and it sounds so much like the guitar. And if you look, of course, again, look at the body of the lute, how it's round and pear-shaped. It just has a really unique sound. Well, this is a Renaissance guitar. You're going to notice the Renaissance guitar has only 4 strings. And look at the unique shape of the head of the guitar and the unique body. And I actually found a video of someone playing a reproduction of a Renaissance guitar. Let's find that video. But look at the unique size. Just so unique, such a beautiful, unique sound produced by the Renaissance guitar. And of course that was a reproduction of a Renaissance guitar, but you'll notice how it looked exactly like we have in this drawing, except of course for the head was different. Notice the sound hole was covered, which is this hole right here. That's called the sound hole. It was covered, just like in our drawing. Let's go ahead and go on to look at some string instruments. These instruments are called viols. And when I say viol, and the viol is the predecessor or the instruments that came before our violin, viola, cello, and double bass. These are the different size of viol instruments. And again, I found another interesting video. And this is a viol consort. A consort is simply a group of instruments that play together. And let's watch this video. We'll watch some of it. And it would seem that my speaker disconnected temporarily, so let's fix that. I want you to really hear this. Let's try that again. I'm just going to press play. Very interesting. That was a viol consort performing, and those again were reproductions of Renaissance viols. Next instrument we're going to look at is the clavichord. We've talked about the harpsichord in class quite a bit. The clavichord is similar to the harpsichord. You remember the harpsichord had a unique sound where the strings were plucked by something metal. It's like it was plucked like that. The same way you would pluck a guitar string. Well, the clavichord is a little bit different. You have something metal striking the string, and it can also produce vibrato. And let's watch this video of a clavichord. That is an example of music performed on a clavichord. Now, we've talked a lot about the harpsichord, another keyboard instrument, how it has pluck strings. And we heard several examples of that earlier on, especially in Chapter 5 in our unit on timbre. And we will hear the clavichord in the Renaissance and the Baroque period, the next period we're going to study. We'll hear the harpsichord as well. And we've also studied the pipe organ. I've shown you this same picture before. And remember how the pipe organ produces and timbre or different types of tone qualities. And you can go back and review recordings from previous chapters for the organ. Wind instruments. There were wind instruments in the Renaissance period. Recorders, trumpets, and trombones. And the ensemble, we've already talked about the word consort, would be an instrument in soprano, alto, tenor, and bass range on those instruments. And I do have a recording of a consort of recorders, and actually this has several instrument ranges. It's pretty amazing. Let's see. Here we go. Look at all the different range of instruments. That is a sample of a consort of recorders. And then here's a picture of a recorder consort. You'll see the different size instruments. And mostly in this time period, it was men who played instruments. There were some noble women, meaning women of wealth and nobility, that would play, but they had to make sure they sat in a graceful position when they played, and they could not be too expressive with their facial expression, because that expression of emotion was considered improper for a woman in this time period. This concludes our presentation video on secular music in the Renaissance. Please contact me via Remind or email if you have any questions. Thank you, guys.